10 of the NASM model, the NASM study guide, the book that is required for the edition number 6. So we're going to hit on balance training concepts today. So we'll go over a few benefits, the importance of things like that, so that you can start getting a good feel for what balance really is all about, why we use it, what are like really everything that is positive about it, because it really is necessary for anybody from a child all the way till an elderly person. So let's dive right in. So, yeah, obviously, the important aspects of it, maintaining balance is for, key for functional movement. Well, yeah, of course. I mean, and that's one of the terms that I kind of struggle with a little bit. Just when you look at the term functional, it's one of those terms where what does functional really mean? All right. And I think, in the land of fitness, wellness, exercise, sport, not so much sport, but, more, the wellness, fitness, health side, exercise side of everything, what you're seeing is a move towards something called functional fitness. And really, it's really it's a really good play on words. Let's just put it that way. So when we talk about functional fitness, what we're really saying is what we're giving the people that need it, or that are asking for our services, or for ourselves, we can be doing functional fitness. Well, what does that mean? It's functional for you. All right. So when you think about this, I know it sounds kind of weird, but when you say, oh, it's functional for you, well, yeah, you're going to be doing things that are going to create movement patterns that are functional for you. So if you're trying to get better at balance, well, then you're going to do functional fitness that's going to improve your strength, your coordination, your balance, your agility. All right. So you're going to use all of that to, have some sort of function to it. Athletes have functional fitness. They are functioning or trying to improve the way that they can function in a given way. Okay, meaning if they're a basketball player, well, of course, if they're a basketball player, what are they going to do? They're going to be functionally fit to play basketball. Well, obviously exceeding normal levels because they're on that different status. But you get what I'm trying to get at here is that when you look at it from a standpoint of what really it's functional for what you're trying to achieve in terms of your goals and your outcomes. So an elderly person, you're going to provide functional fitness for them. Well, what does that mean? It basically means that you're going to get them to be able to move better, to be able to control their body better, to have better proprioception, to have better balance, coordination, and agility. So in case they ever have a close opportunity where they can fall or something, or where they have a close opportunity where they may fall, I'm not pushing that. So you know what I mean. So you get where we're going with this, and so that's why I think, take a little bit of time to understand what functional fitness is, what functional movements really mean. So interestingly enough, excuse me. Interestingly enough, um, balance has always been one of those things where we assume that it's stationary or static. There's not movement that's behind it, but really, the concept really does blow up into the fact that you talk about being static and dynamic. Right? You can provide movement quality that will help somebody to improve their balance by putting them through ranges of motion, by putting them through functional movements that will provide them to propel their body in some way. Now, I don't mean propel like you're doing like jump lunges, or you're doing, box jumps or things like that. I mean movement, propelling your body, moving your body. Okay. So, and then what is it, really what we're trying to achieve here? We're trying to reduce force at the right joint angle, at the right time, in the right plane of motion, all right, to an optimal degree where you can then provide what we would call functional dynamic balance and then neuromuscular efficiency. So let's kind of break that one down just a little bit here. So the ability to reduce force at the right joint. Okay, so if you're going down the stairs, then you understand that technically it's a total body movement, because really, when you're going down the stairs, you have to control your upper and your lower body simultaneously to basically decelerate the system when it goes down those stairs. All right. So let's just call it though the ankle, the knee, and the hip that we're gonna, those we're trying to reduce force and make sure that we reduce the force at those joints to decelerate us so we don't trip and fall, or so we don't let our upper body start getting too far in front of us, which will change really where your center of gravity then sits. So, um, at the right time. Well, yeah, if you're trying to balance yourself in a way as you're going down the stairs, but you're moving your body in a at the wrong time, then you have the ability to increase the speed, and then you end up moving too far forward, and then you fall and you can and hit your face. Technically hit your face. So, um, going down the stairs, right plane of motion, yeah, we're trying to work and balance ourselves in a sagittal base. Okay. If you're trying to move side to side, you're going to be working more frontal. And then if you're moving in a rotational format, then there's your transverse. So, with all of those three things combined, reduction of force at the right time, using the right directional cues or planes of motion, it's going to require functional dynamic balance, meaning you're moving and you're functioning with that movement and balancing your system overall. And then neuromuscular efficiency, what we're referring to there, is the ability of your nervous system to coordinate with your muscular system to be able to do those three things that we just talked about previously, to reduce force of the right joint at the right time in the right direction, or plane of motion. Okay, that's what we're referring to there. So balance, so if you're on a balance beam and you're trying to balance on one foot, the problem with that is that, yeah, there, okay, so you're on the balance beam, you're basically saying hip all the way down to ankle. That, just say that that's the area we're focusing on. We're trying to reduce the forces in there. We're trying to stabilize them at the right time. Okay. So when you're standing there one footed on a balance beam, you have sway that comes into play. You have your system not being fully in line, that could come into play. All of those things can come into play, and that can change the reduction of the force. So you might be applying different forces. So you get going and you're standing there, and all of a sudden, like, you start to feel unbalanced. Okay. So what do you try to do? You try to, in the opposite direction, counterbalance what's going on. Well, that's a form of, obviously, where this is more, it's still functional dynamic balance, in that you're trying to counteract what's going on. And neuromuscularly, nervous system and the muscular system working together to fire off proper muscles to counterbalance what's going on. That's what's happening in those moments right there. So, it becomes a little bit of a challenge. But then what happens is, the less balanced you are, the more ability it is for you to overcompensate. And that's why people have like little kids are a good example of that, because they're not really so balanced. They stand on that balance beam with one leg, and they get going for a little while. They start getting a little fatigued, and they start to sway, and then eventually they're trying to catch themselves. Well, then their system is just not ready for it in terms of the understanding component of it. So they counterbalance that action that took place, and try to reduce the force again in the opposite direction, and it ends up having them topple over. So that's the process of everything. So we're trying to minimize that through functional dynamic balance and neuromuscular efficiency, trying to get everything to work in coordination with each other, so that you can basically move or stand or direct in the correct manner, so that you don't topple over. And interestingly enough, balance is crucial. If you ever watched a little toddler try to get walking, that you can see that balance is critical there, just because of the fact that they're working so hard with a wider stance, wider base of support. Hands might be out to the sides to try to counteract all those movements, because they're not coordinated. They don't have high levels of neuromuscular efficiency. So the reason why I bring up walking is because walking is one of the it's basically it's a coordinated fall. And when you fall, obviously that means you're out of balance. So it's uncoordinated, it's unbalanced, but we find a way to make it balanced. Okay? So that's just something to think about as well. All right. So with balance training, what we're trying to do here is we're providing, like it says, constant stress to your threshold, all right, to your balance threshold. Now, each person has their own, obviously, all right, each person has their own balance threshold, and we know that because you can put somebody on a balance board, 2-footed standing, and you can have them stand there, and they can stand there without coming out of balance for 5 minutes. And you take another person, and they have a hard time getting on that balance board and being able to stand without touching the sides for 5 seconds. So everybody has a different threshold, but we're going to work that. Okay. So each person has that threshold for how much instability they eventually, how much instability, how quickly it gets to that unstable part. All right. So you push that the limit to how far you go from stable to unstable. Okay. So with this limit of stability, what we're saying is how far can you as a person get outside of your base of support before you start to realize that you lose control, or that you're starting to, become unbalanced. All right. But yeah, it's losing control. So if you're a person who can bend over to the side, just say that you're going completely lateral, so you're on one foot and you're on your right foot, and you're bringing your left foot up to the side, like you're doing abduction, ABD, and you're trying to touch your hand to the ground on the right side. That's challenging in its own right. Well, each person is going to be able to get to a certain distance, if not all the way, depending upon their threshold, but also based on how much their body can sustain being outside of that base of support. Now, the base of support, if you were to stand up straight and you put your feet down on the ground and they're about hip distance apart and you're standing looking forward, outside of your base of support is outside of that stance position. So if you put yourself in a unipenal stance, meaning one-footed stance on that right foot, and you're trying to lift the left leg out to the side while trying to touch down on the right side of the body outside of your base of support, you're basically taking and moving and shifting that system all the way to the right. So that puts a lot of stress, as we talked about here, constantly stressing. All right, a lot of stress being placed there. All right, now and you're working on the frontal plane. That's not even sagittal, so that's side to side frontal plane motion. By maximizing multiplanar or multiple planes of motion movements, you're going to enhance the system at a better rate, okay, which will then provide you with better movement patterns and everything like that. So again, we don't always want to stay front to back, which is sagittal. We want to go side to side in the frontal plane. We want to go in rotation with the transverse plane, okay? So we always have to be thinking about how can we make it, and constantly try to get to that threshold and then enhance that threshold so that you can challenge your own balance to get you better. And that's what we're always trying to do. Okay. So then what do we end up doing? We end up trying to get ourselves to what we call a proprioceptively enriched environment, where you're basically getting yourself in a controlled, unstable position, or unstable yet controllable environment. Okay. That's what we're looking at for right there. Um, and then, obviously, like many things in our life, skipping steps is never, ever a positive thing here. So balance is the same way. All right. We have to be able to progress in the right manner, using the right equipment and things like that. All right. So, with proper progression, we're talking about from the floor. Okay. That's, starting with, 2 feet, then moving to 1 foot. Okay. That, it's going from two prongs to one prong. That's really important. And people assume, trainers, coaches, they assume that going directly into like 1-footed things, it's actually inappropriate. Starting with 2 feet is going to be just as important as anything. Okay. So, that's one of the things that we have to think about. And then going from the floor and then using all of your floor modalities, we can then progress to a balance beam. Okay, now balance beams range from being wide to narrow, so we want to start wider and continuously move them through. Um, and then from there, what we can then do is go from the onto a half foam roll. All right, now a half foam roll is take a foam roller that you know about, cut it in half, meaning cut it in half the long way, and you're going to have a half circle. All right, you're going to have a half circle, and then you're going to have, the flat part that where you cut, technically. You can buy them this way too, by the way. So you don't have to worry about cutting a foam roller in half just to do this. So working with a half foam roller, there is a curved, the top is curved, unlike a balance beam that's obviously flat. But a half foam roll, you can use both sides. If you start with the flat side down, you'll have the curved side up, and then that's just like kind of being on a balance beam, but it's more challenging because it's not flat. Then as you progress, you can always flip that over and try working on the rolled side and the flat side up. Kind of like being on a almost like being on an upside down Bosu ball, but just a lot more narrow. Okay. And then you have foam pads. For those of you, foam pads and then balance discs. If any of you have ever gone through any rehabilitation of the lower body, those are those unstable. The pad, foam pad is really what it sounds like. It's a pad of foam that when you stand on it, it creates this uneven surface below your feet that if you don't put it proper, same with balance discs, if you don't put proper pressure on them, they'll make you distort in one way or the other. So that's the proper progression there. Floor, balance beam, half foam roll, foam pads, and balance discs. Now, on the actual test, you will be asked about those. So make sure, anything progression wise, you usually are going to be asked upon on the actual CPT test. Okay. So, what are the benefits that we're looking at here? And obviously the first one is very, very important, is it improves your dynamic joint stabilization. Now, this is really important because during specific movements, if you have unstable joints, you end up with bad movement patterns, and then you basically increase your potential risk of injury. Okay, so by having improvements in that joint stabilization, you're basically saying that that joint is going to do what it's supposed to do. It's going to move the way it's supposed to, but the body knows that it's stable, so that when it goes to apply pressure downward, it's not going to feel like it's going to move in a bad movement pattern. Okay, so eventually what happens is, as you start to become more, more benefits keep coming from this balance training, you start to develop an awareness, or as they say, a kinesthetic awareness of the system, and then you start to understand how to control instability, move, an unstable issue that you might have. So think about, again, an elderly person who used to, who was at risk of falls. They're going to be able to be challenged in their training, but they're basically going to be able to overcome that and push their threshold to a higher degree, so that if they do get to that point where they felt like they become unbalanced and they start to fall, they can counteract that and change it and make it so that they can not hurt themselves. Okay. So, one of the things with balance and joint dysfunction, there, obviously it can lead to, we said bad movement patterns. It can lead to bad posture, and one of those things that can happen is you can end up with low back pain. Now, these statistics are, this book is it's not that old, so it's within 5 years. So these numbers are fairly accurate to the current day. Obviously, they're not exact, but what we're saying here is about 80%. I think it might be like 82% or something like that, but about 80%. About 80% of people experience low back pain. Now, that means 80% of people have experienced at least an acute bout of low back pain, meaning that their lower back bothered them at least one time. Okay, so that's something that can occur. Um, you know, Also, looking at that, that's every 8 out of 10 people, so that's a high number. Now, that doesn't mean it's chronic, which is long term. So we gotta look at those numbers a little bit differently. But 80% of people at least feel it. Okay, with joint dysfunction, you're talking about the knee mechanics. The knee is a stable joint, the elbow is a stable joint, the thoracic spine is a set of stable joints. Okay, and so the knee, if it's not stable, if there's joint dysfunction, okay, it can lead to ACL tears. It can lead to obviously ACL is the major one, but that's the one that gets damaged the most. But every year you're talking about 80 to 100,000 people that actually, they kind of they deal with so it could be a tear, it could be a complete tear, it could be a partial tear. You could talk about how it could be a sprain. So all those things can occur at that point. Okay. Um, let's see. And then more than then the most injured area obviously is the ankle. So again, bad movement patterns can create bad ankle support. All right, so we got to be able to make sure that we can get balance correct to enhance um, our neuromuscular efficiency so that we can move correctly. Okay. So then here, what this is kind of going in through the whole injury progression here, but what we're talking about is you have joint dysfunction, which we kind of hit on. What it ends up leading to is muscle inhibition or the turning off of specific, like basically those muscles are not functioning the way that they're supposed to be. Then and leads to a joint injury, which promotes swelling. And then once you heal, what it does is it alter as you're healing, and from that injury and from that healing process, you end up with an altered proprioception, which basically means that the body has changed how it perceives changes in sensory information and then how to dictate movement patterns based on it. So you're going to end up with altered sensory and altered movement patterns. So it's not a good situation to be in. So that's why changing our and creating better balance will increase our joint, will decrease joint dysfunction, which will make it more functional as it should be. All right. So like it says here, balance exercises are a frequent component of integrated ACL injury prevention programs. That is true. Now, unfortunately, females are more at risk of ACL damage, simply because anatomically, with the way that their hips are and how they relate to the angle that goes down, basically an imaginary line that runs from the hip down through the knee, it basically creates a different style of torque that's placed on the knee joint, therefore putting more pressure anteriorly on that ACL. So, if you are working with female athletes in any way, this is one thing to always think about in the back of your head is that and I'm talking about from a non-contact standpoint. So I'm not talking about if two players bump into each other or if a football player bangs into it. I'm talking about from making a cut or to be running forward or going up and down stairs, whatever it may be. It's just they're more prone to it at that point. Okay. So just something to kind of think and put into the back of your mind there. But balance programming is definitely involved in trying to prevent ACL injuries from occurring. So it's a prevention program. It's not a reaction program, meaning like an ACL has already been damaged. We're doing this for preventative purposes to make sure that we can reduce the rate of ACL reoccurrences or ACL injuries in general. Okay. So, what are you going to do when it comes to your balance programs? Well, it's pretty straightforward. It needs to be safe. Okay. Now that's the thing with balance is you're kind of becoming unstable so on purpose. So you need to make sure it's safe. So you make sure you have the proper matting, make sure you have the proper flooring, things that you're working close to or move, things like that. There's your progressions, easy to hard, simple to complex, known to unknown, things that they know how to do to things that they don't know how to do, and then stationary versus movement based, static versus dynamic. Okay, and then we already talked about the proprioceptively challenging. The only difference there is the foam pad, we're missing the disc, the balance disc at that point. Okay, so just ways that we can progress and make things harder as we go. So with variables, what we're talking about here is we want to make sure that balance is being challenged in all three planes of motion, but we also want to make sure that we're looking at full, partial, or end range of motion. Now, full meaning through the full range of motion of that particular joint. Partial meaning that it could be at the lower portion of something or the upper portion. So it could be at the top end or the bottom end of that movement. And then the end range is at, like it says exactly, the end range, the very end component of that range of motion, where when you achieve that last at the very last stake of range of motion, and that's where you can work from as well. So it doesn't have to be full range of motion all the time, especially when you're working with people who are coming back from injuries or anything like that. You might be using partial and end range a lot more than you think, and it's not anything that's unheard of, or is it something that's asinine? Because it's something that's very, very appropriate, because you need to be able to get them to work partial and end range before you can get them to work in full if they're coming back from an injury. So all right. Then, of course, following the OPT model, for balance training, we're talking about we can be in the stabilization, the strength, and the power components. So, more stabilization wise is going to be more longer duration. Strength is going to be a little bit less reps. All right, and then power is going to be very quick. Okay. So, in your book, when you're looking at everything from your book, you can actually find, and if I'll pull the book out right now so I can go to the right section here. There's a bunch of different exercises that you can see and look through. So when you're looking through chapter 10, just so I can get the right pages for you here, so you can kind of, if you look at pages 250, I'll keep go back here a little bit. 254 is where in the 6th edition book, page 254, you start seeing your balance stabilization exercises. What you see in front of you there is just a single leg balance, and it's as easy as that. Eventually so that's static. Eventually what you'll do is they have you progress to single leg balance reaches in different planes of motion. So you're actually going to take that foot that's up in the air like this lady has right here, and you're going to start bringing it out in front of you straight. You're going to start sliding it to the right, so you're going to drop the leg a little bit lower to the ground and slide it out to the right, and then have it, then rotate backward with it. So working all 3 planes of motion we can do. So, and then it progresses, there's a lot of different stabilization exercises that they do show you, which is really good in here. So 254 to 264, so you got just about 10 pages worth of decent stabilization exercise, not stabilization, but balance exercises that you can do for all 3: stabilization, strength, and power. Okay, so definitely worth checking out to kind of, go along with what we're talking about here. There's, balance strength exercise that's called a single leg touchdown. You're almost getting to the point where it's not really a single leg squat, it's more like a single leg deadlift to it, to an extent. All right, and then the other one is more power. So what we're doing here is we're starting with one, give a hop, switch feet, and then stabilize before you move on to do it again, right? Alternating back and forth. So really kind of cool how you can see the difference between stationary, more stabilization based, to strength. We're going to start getting some movement, like how this person is gazing forward, eyes are focused, and that can really help with engaging proper balance mechanisms. And then power, being able to change direction, being able to explode very quickly, whatever it is that we require of, and then you're gonna, because of the nature of power movements and how they're very explosive, and then you have to rebalance yourself. It's going to put more demand on the body. It's going to put more neuromuscular efficiency. It's going to enhance dynamic neuromuscular efficiency, and it's going to create more challenge to be able to react to the stabilization that's going to be required once you land or change direction. Okay, and then how would we do it? Well, how would we do it? Well, in all honesty, everybody really could stand. Everybody, not just one single group of people or one special population or whatever it may be. Everybody would do very well with, starting with phase 1 and even going back to that. So if you just went through a really challenging, 12-week exercise program and you're an experienced exerciser, then you might go back to doing some balance programming to get yourself back in alignment and back working correctly, because asymmetries can occur or imbalances can occur from side to side. Okay, and then you progress appropriately. Stabilization, then you work within your strength levels and your power levels to be able to get you to be where you want to be. Now, do you want to be in the power level? Well, you don't necessarily have to be, but you can be, okay, depending upon who it is that you are or who it is that you're going to be working with. And then for program design purposes, take what you see here, and this is all of what typically strength is broken down into muscular endurance is phase 2, hypertrophy is phase 3, and then strength or max strength is phase 4. But in this sense, they put all three together to give you one strength output, because you're not going to get growth out of this. You're not going to get max strength out of this. So just understanding that we're looking at the parameters, the sets, the reps, the tempo, the rest, the number of exercises that you're going to be doing. So putting balance into your program is only going to benefit you more than it's going to negate your training. And if anything, it may help you within your intra training, meaning like within your programming, you're like, oh, I could stand to put some balance stuff in and do it before I get working out on deadlift day or whatever it may be. And you might see that it's creating a better balance of the system, and both sides of the body are starting to fire correctly and simultaneously, neuromuscular efficiency. And so therefore you end up with a better deadlift, whether it be a sumo or conventional, it doesn't really matter. But it can help enhance the body to signal the right messages to both sides simultaneously. Okay, so just kind of put that in the back of your hat and understand that we can use these effectively and in the right way to be able to get us to overcome and create a higher balance threshold than what our bodies normally can put it through, or to get our clients and athletes to be able to get to that point. Okay, balance, really, it's not so much that it's an easy chapter. It's just there is some terms in there, but understanding that it's very much necessary to be able to use it effectively, and people can use it ineffectively, which is going to hinder progress. So always make sure that you're following the right protocols to make sure that you're getting your people what they need, and making sure that they're working on alignment and posture while they're doing all this. You can't just have them just go through motion just to go through motion. So but yeah, chapter 10 pretty quick, really nice, short and sweet here. So hope you guys got something from this, and we will talk soon.